You can listen to The Professional Left wherever you get your podcasts, on Netroots Radio, or at our website, proleftpod.com, where you can also contribute to this podcast. There's a PayPal button at our website, or you can mail us a letter and or contribution at Post Office Box 9133, Springfield, Illinois, 62791.
This is the podcast for the week of November 22nd, 2024. It's not safe for work.
Recorded live from the corner of the resistance, where our watchword every time a Republican claims, but I didn't vote for this, still is.
Yes, you did. Yes, you did.
It's The Professional Left with Driftglass and Bluegal.
And yes, we used that on Tuesday's show, and you will hear it again on our show.
Yes. Events will demand it. We promise you we'll demand it.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Now, by now, you all know that Matt Gaetz removed his name from consideration for the office of Attorney General, and you may know the breaking news that he was immediately replaced by Pam Bondi, cover-up lady of Florida. Donald Trump is not going far from Mar-a-Lago for anyone that he trusts with the law or law breaking. And my only comment on any of this is, first of all, I talked with Driftglass about this last night, and he insists, and I agree with him, that it is not hard to avoid underage sex.
No.
And apparently it is also not difficult, according to Driftglass, to avoid a Venmo trail of payments to quote-unquote girlfriends.
Yes. Laundered through your fake son.
Right. No, that's not difficult to avoid those things. But my other comment is to repeat what John Fetterman, Senator of Pennsylvania, said earlier today. Pace yourselves because it isn't even Thanksgiving yet. And he's absolutely right. This so-called incoming administration is going to have only three realities and three qualities: cruelty, corruption, and incompetence. And I really think we need to focus on the corruption.
Yeah.
Watch where the money goes. Watch what Elon Musk gets for all his money. And Matt Gaetz and all these other clowns that are going into or not going into the Donald Trump praise machine that will be his cabinet. That's this year's inauguration crowd size.
Yeah, exactly.
And the irony is, this is specifically what Project 2025 was designed to bypass.
Yeah, turnkey. It was going to be a turnkey operation.
Yeah, because they wasted 100 days on inauguration crowd size, and the right-wing people who genuinely want to get rid of the Department of Education, who genuinely want to privatize Medicare. Mm-hmm. These guys who are true believers in Republican policy don't want to waste that time this time around. They know they've got the trifecta for 15 months.
Right.
And they want to plow through and privatize as much and grab as much as they can. This is not about getting rid of government. This is about grabbing the resources that government has for themselves.
Looting. It's a looting.
And looting it. And that, especially the Department of Education, this is about looting. Looting funds that educate our kids. That's what it is. So they were trying to avoid all of the incompetence and vanity part of it that Donald Trump isn't interested in writing bills or having policy. And don't forget, Donald Trump sold his DC hotel lease. Mm-hmm. So now he has to please Elon Musk in order to gain from office himself personally. So keep watching that grift. That's the thing to keep your eye on.
Yeah. Well, and my only thought about Matt Gaetz removing himself was that he pulled out because he found out the office of the Attorney General was more than 18 years old, and he doesn't want, and that's why he doesn't want any part of that.
Right. And
there's a million of them. There are better people doing better jokes out there, but we're ad free, so this is just what you get. Speaking of which, before we dive into the toxic waste barrel, I did have a passing thought that's been bugging me for a couple of weeks now. And that's, I don't know if you guys listen to a lot of podcasts. I do. I listen to several, some of which I listen to sort of monitor enemy behavior. But
And I finally got Driftglass some wireless earbuds so that I didn't have to walk into the kitchen and hear all that stuff. But yeah.
Yes. And I mean, between old-timey radio, which is most of my time spent listening, I do try to keep track of what's going on out there in the big wide world so I can bring it back to here to our little podcast. But the way big-time doom-scrolling podcasts are punctuated every 20 minutes by live reads of perky commercials for boutique products is so fucking weird to me. This is a very jarring non sequitur, at least I find it to be so. That's not a problem with us because even after the 14 years we've been doing this, all of our sponsors are still fake.
Yeah.
We Freshly Poured, I don't know if you know this, is not a real sponsor. It's not a real thing. I mean, it should be, but it isn't.
Yeah.
And so we don't get any ad revenue from anybody. We're 100% ad free. So when I listen to other podcasts, these are big time podcasts with hundreds of thousands of listeners.
And their hosts make a lot of money off of the advertising revenue.
They make a shitload of money. Yeah. And nothing screams late stage capitalism to me louder than a podcast host going on and on about how depressed they are and how awful things are. And then suddenly, Bombas socks, the most comfortable socks you'll ever own. A live read from the person who's hosting the podcast, just breaking off in the middle of sobbing to remind you to buy Bombas socks, or in the middle of like scolding Democrats for not throwing trans people under the bus.
Honest to God.
Suddenly,
that's happening.
Suddenly, Boll and Branch sheets. You'll sleep the sleep of the just on these amazing 1,000 thread count sheets. Whatever your dreams may be, dream them on Boll and Branch. They're the most comfortable sheets you'll ever own.
Yeah.
And, are your listeners like drinking themselves into a coma every night because they're so freaked out by what's in the news? Perhaps they should spend $400 on the Bartesian Premium Cocktail Maker. They're elevating cocktail experience by offering premium cocktails, pardon my language, I'm all drunk on Bartesian drink, without the hassle. It's the most comforting booze you'll ever drink. And you
got your socks, your sheets, and your booze. You should be all set.
It goes on and on. And it's just, I understand why they do it. I understand that they need to make money, a lot of them, a shit ton of money, a lot of them. But it is so jarring to me that how it is Rod Serling, when he was writing for television, writing drama plays, said, I can't do a dramatic presentation on television when I'm interrupted every 20 minutes by a teddy bear selling toilet paper.
Right.
It just indicates, this is a commercial enterprise. Yeah. The filler is the content. What we're here to do is sell you Bombas socks and Boll and Branch sheets.
Yeah.
And what's in between is irrelevant. And if we really are in this crisis, I'm not saying give up your advertisers. I'm not saying boycott anybody. I'm just saying it is so weird to me. It's like, Winston Churchill announcing, we will fight them on the beaches, we'll fight them on the hills. But first, Folgers coffee for that pick-me-up feeling in the morning. And then he'll get back to, what Hitler's doing in Germany.
Yeah.
But that is just late-stage capitalism.
Well, it is.
It really is.
And the other one is Nicole Wallace. We're going to sneak in a break.
We're just going to sneak in a little break here.
You're not sneaking in jack shit.
No,
okay?
nothing is being snuck past anyone. Right. We know what you're doing. And we just don't watch MSNBC anymore.
No, we don't.
We listen to people like Keith Olbermann who are watching and laughing their heads off about Joe Scarborough going down in flames. And you read me something just before we started about Mika Brzezinski was caught flat-footed by anybody who suggests this was a bad idea.
Yeah, to go and visit Trump at Mar-a-Lago, where I was genuinely surprised. Yeah. So we are reading those Substacks. Yeah. And Oliver Willis and so forth, and finding out, the dirt. But no, I'm on a news fast right now. Yeah. And part of the reason I'm on a news fast, I will tell you, has to do with abuse. Mm-hmm. Donald Trump is an abuser.
Yeah. Yes.
One of the ways he abuses people is to lie to them constantly.
Yes.
And he abuses his own followers and he abuses the rest of us by simply continuing to nonstop lie. And the stealing. He's definitely taking our national credit card and gambling at his casino, which loses money.
And don't forget the sex crimes.
And then the sex crimes and the rape. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he is an abuser. And so the mainstream media that has been sane washing him and now going down to Mar-a-Lago to make sure everything's okay, and you're not going to send your attorney general after us, are you?
Mm-hmm.
That is absolute gaslighting.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be okay, says the entire board at Morning Joe, all of whom stopped paying Social Security taxes in January because that's how much money they have. And they're all, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. We'll make it through. Yeah, on your bed of money, you'll make it through.
And they'll be making it through on Bombas sheets or Bombas socks with Bowl Branch sheets.
Bowl Branch sheets.
Yeah, nothing against those fine products. If they want to send us free stuff, that's great.
Oh, sure.
But it's such oil and water.
Yeah.
The situation we're in and the products they're trying to sell and the bullshit they're trying to sell us about why they're capitulating don't mix. And you can shake them all night and they will not mix. And the fact that they continue to insist that they do is just insulting. Yeah, but,
it's a different world from the one that we are occupying.
Yes.
Where you and I have donated microphones and used laptops, and I stay up, go into my 10th or 12th hour of work that day, getting and you write the script for
I do
3.5 hours. That's what we. It's just the two of us.
Oh, honey, I just write for like 20 minutes. It's porn for the other 2.5 hours. It's porn. Mm-hmm.
So today we're going to jump into the fire hose of awful with the latest escapade of that Christian prayer meeting oversharer and Republican attention whore, which she is queen of. She outdoes Marjorie Taylor Greene.
She really
Nancy
does.
Mace, who really just wants to be the next trollop getting paid to tell lies on Fox News because money.
Wear short skirts, flash some cleavage, and lie to the public and make a fortune doing it. Yep.
This is from the Daily Beast. Quote, I know the cynical truth about Nancy Mace's anti-trans war. A former aide for Representative Nancy Mace has accused the Congresswoman of introducing a resolution to ban transgender women from using women's bathrooms at the Capitol as a craven attempt to get on Fox News.
Mm-hmm.
If you think this bill is about protecting women and not simply a ploy to get on Fox News, you've been fooled. Mace's former communications director, Natalie Johnson, wrote in a post on X, unquote. And we have seen her tweets from a couple years ago where, she did gay rights legislation. Nancy Mace was the reasonable Republican on gay rights.
Yeah.
As she came into the Congress. And that doesn't work in this party. So she flipped over.
They all did.
And they all did. But she went spearheaded, this nonsense.
Well, they've all flipped on everything they said they believed in. All of them.
Yep.
And this is something that's just so pronounced because, as you know by now, another easily demonized and vulnerable population has been targeted by the Republican news hate machine.
Yep.
And all the ghouls are rushing to get their shots in, while all the sensible centrists are warning Dems that if we want to win elections ever again, we'd better find a trans person to punch in the face pretty hurry up quick, right? That's the only key to it. The culture stuff. And I would like it if they would use that phrase to stop and explain what specifically do you mean by the culture stuff? Do you mean like the stuff they grow algae in? Like laboratory culture? Do you mean going to the art institute or enjoying music? What are you talking about? Because you're clearly...
Or are you talking about your gay marriage, Tim Miller?
Right. Culture stuff. Yeah. And it's always, we should stop short of making sure Tim Miller's marriage is annulled. Mm-hmm. That's fine. That's just about the right amount of culture liberals should have. But over that line, that's maybe too much. But it's telling. They don't ever make clear what they're talking about or how Democrats should do differently. They just leave it hanging there because they don't want to talk about it. And, no Republican ghoul has brought the knives out harder and faster than the opportunistic virus that is Nancy Mace. This is from MSNBC. Quote, Representative Nancy Mace, Republican of South Carolina, is making waves after introducing a resolution explicitly targeting her transgender colleague, Representative-elect Sarah McBride, Democrat of Delaware, that would bar McBride and other transgender women who work in the Capitol from accessing women's restrooms or other gender-based facilities. House Speaker Mike Johnson on Wednesday announced his support for the resolution in a statement. All single-sex facilities in the Capitol and House office buildings, such as restrooms, changing rooms, and locker rooms, are reserved for individuals of that biological sex, he said, adding, women deserve women's-only spaces, unquote. Like on an aircraft. You have men's and women's restrooms, and you're not allowed to. Oh, that's right. There are no markers on aircraft. But this is all new and awful and unprecedented, right, Bluegal? I mean, this is all brand new. Sure, hating scapegoats is the glue that has always held the right together. But doing it inside Congress, I mean, to a colleague, this is brand new, right? Bluegal, this is all new, unprecedented, right?
Yeah, I just want to add that it's banning trans people from a bathroom on Trans Remembrance Day is right up there, Yeah.
They picked it. They picked the right day for it, didn't they?
Yep. And I do want to give a hat tip to 10 Grain, who noted the top 10 trans man YouTubers who are, biologically born as females and now have beards and male chests and present very masculinely. Mm-hmm. And, as Tangrain pointed out, on the flip side, these dudes are now forced to use Nancy Mace's bathroom. Mm-hmm. But yeah, no, you're right. It is amazing that this is not a new phenomenon in the Republican Party within the Congress to do this.
Nope.
And see if this ad from the last century, rings a bell.
You needed that job, and you were the best qualified, but they had to give it to a minority because of a racial quota. Is that really fair? Harvey Gantt says it is. Gantt supports Ted Kennedy's racial quota law that makes the color of your skin more important than your qualifications. You'll vote on this issue next Tuesday. For racial quotas, Harvey Gantt. Against racial quotas, Jesse Helms.
Yes, that was Republican Senator Jesse Helms' infamous White Hands ad that won him his narrow re-election victory over Harvey Gantt in 1990. We've talked about that ad before. It was written and produced by Alex Castellanos, who we have also talked about before. Castellanos is a Cuban-American political consultant who worked for two of the most infamous segregationist Republican senators during the before-time drift class, Jesse Helms and Strom Thurmond.
Yep.
Flat out racist, both of them.
Open segregationist assholes.
Yep.
Both, they're dead, and I'm glad they both are.
For his sins, Castellanos was made a regular guest commentator on Meet the Press.
Yes, he was.
And he was also a contributor for CNN and had a fellowship at the Harvard Kennedy School's Institute of Politics. He also co-founded Purple Strategies, a bipartisan communications firm, because bipartisanship is where bigots go to rest and reload when they're out of favor. Mm-hmm. Castellano was also a Trump guy, but wasn't sufficiently MAGA to please the faithful. So when some rando on Twitter yelled at him for, quote, working on Paul Ryan's Fox News, along with Brett Baer Cavuto and others who decided to work against President Trump, thinking the Democrat thugs will forget you, they won't. I mean, this is the insanity that's out there. You should have done journalism when the Uni Party was blocking the president, unquote.
Yeah. Yeah. You can't save these people.
Rando nut job on Twitter.
Yeah. Some asshole with 300 followers just raving. But Castellano replied to him and reassured this clown that, quote, okay, then I support Trump as I hope you know, but call them as I see them, unquote. Anyway, enough about Castellanos. Back to Jesse Helms, because it's important to point out that for all of his openly, viciously racist views, he was never a pariah in the Republican Party. And he was not a fluke either. In fact, Helms was the longest-serving, popularly elected senator in North Carolina's history, serving from 1973 to 2003.
And his party made him chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee from 1995 to 2001.
Yeah.
Now, that may have been so that he would not have domestic policy to comment upon.
Could be.
But still, they gave him power.
And his bullshit about how much money we're sending overseas to them foreign countries, especially them brown countries, was why people that I worked with back then swore. I'd ask them, how they're all upset about the foreign aid budget.
Yeah.
Which is like a fraction of 1% of the federal budget, and money well spent usually. And I would ask them, well, how much money of the federal budget do you think actually is spent? And they're like, like a quarter. Quarter of the federal budget goes to foreign countries, foreign aid. I'm like, no. And they just were dumbfounded that it wasn't, a quarter or a half of all of our money are going to foreign governments, because they listened to this asshole and people that repeated this asshole. And by the way, he wasn't run out of office because he was a racist scumbag.
Nope.
He's retired.
Yeah.
He got to 2003. He was tired, an sick old man. He retired. So now let's go back to Nancy Mace, because this actually will all tie together. And the shock among pundits about how unprecedented it was for a member of Congress to go after a colleague so hatefully and so personally. Why would you personally and hatefully go after a fellow member of the legislative body? We don't do that in Congress. You can hate outside these walls all you want, but not inside these walls. It's unprecedented unless you remember Jesse Helms' promise to the first African-American woman elected to the Senate, Carol Moseley Braun from Illinois, because Nancy Mace is just doing the 2004 version of what Jesse Helms was up to in 1993. Because the Republicans need somebody to hate. They cannot function without a target for their rage and a lens through which to focus it. So today, we're going to do a little no fair remembering stuff, right? We love doing that stuff. Mm-hmm. So please sit back and enjoy. I'm not sure enjoy is the right word, but sit back and relax and listen to these early examples of sane washing by the media. This is compiled by Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting. And their report of this aggregation is from August 31st, 2001, which is, as you know, getting close to being a quarter of a century ago. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Quote, media downplay bigotry of Jesse Helms. And occasionally I'm going to shout out, does this remind you of anything? Because I can't help myself. News that North Carolina's Jesse Helms will retire from the Senate when his term is up in 2003 received polite coverage in mainstream media. USA Today, August 22nd, 2001, described Helms' view as unabashed and outspoken conservatism. To the Washington Post, same day, same month, same year, Helms is one of the Senate's, quote, most ardent champions of conservative causes. I meant of bold colors and few pastels. Curiously, using the past tense, the LA Times observed, same day, same month, same year, he personified the unvarnished, uncompromising attack dog brand of conservatism. Most of the coverage alluded to Helms' unrepentant racism and homophobia, although few called it that. Some outlets presented his bigotry as merely accusations from political foes. Uh-huh. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah.
Quote, his opponents have accused him of using race to win elections. That was CBS Evening News, August 21st, 2001. Overall, most outlets painted Helms as a conservative whose career had merely been punctuated by controversial episodes.
Say controversial one more goddamn time.
Damn right. Not as a demagogue whose career had been defined by the politics of hate and reaction. One exception, and this surprised me when I read it, one exception was Washington Post columnist David Broder.
Ooh, yeah.
I know, high Broderism.
Yeah.
Mr. Both Sides do it, but he said in his August 29th column, it was headlined, Jesse Helms, white racist.
Yeah, that's not sugarcoating it, no, I gotta say.
I will give it to the man. He had a lot of flaws, and he made Both Sides do it a cult. But in this regard, he was quite correct. His column offered a glimpse into the public record that many other reporters were sidestepping. Broder offered a few examples of Helms' bigotry. There are many.
As an aide to the 1950 Senate campaign of North Carolina Republican candidate Willis Smith, Helms reportedly helped create attack ads against Smith's opponent, including one which read, "White people, wake up before it is too late." Do you want Negroes working beside you, your wife and your daughters, in your mills and factories? Frank Graham favors mingling of the races. Another ad featured photographs Helms himself had doctored to illustrate the allegation that Graham's wife had danced with a black man. This was the time when Queen Elizabeth danced with a black man also.
I know. Shocking. This is shocking.
Yep.
Back to the article. Ancient history? No. Helms remains unapologetic to this day. 40 years after the Smith campaign, Helms would win an election against black opponent Harvey Gantt with another ad playing to racist white fear, the so-called white hands ad in which a man's hands crumple a rejected job application while a voiceover intones, "You needed that job, but they had to give it to a minority." In columns, commentaries, and pronouncements from the Senate floor, Helms sowed hatred and called names. The University of North Carolina was the University of Negroes and Communists. Black civil rights activists were communists and sex perverts. Does any of this sound at all familiar to you?
Yeah. Of civil rights protests, Helms wrote, "The Negro cannot count forever on the kind of restraint that's thus far left him free to clog the streets, disrupt traffic, and interfere with other men's rights." He also wrote, quote, "Crime rates and irresponsibility among Negroes are a fact of life which must be faced." He's a fucking racist.
Yeah. And I clipped out some of the more blatant N-word comments from this column. It goes on and on and on for pages.
Yeah. Over the years, Helms has declared homosexuality degenerate and homosexuals weak, morally sick wretches. That was in 1994. In a tirade highlighting his routine opposition to AIDS research funding, Helms lashed out at the Kennedy-Hatch AIDS bill in 1988. "There is not one single case of AIDS in this country that cannot be traced in origin to sodomy."
Yep. In 1999, Helms remonstrated 10 female members of the House of Representatives to act like ladies when they interrupted a Senate Foreign Relations Committee hearing to demand support of a UN treaty against gender discrimination, and subsequently had them removed from the hearing by Capitol Police. Unquote. And finally, we arrive where we've been going all along. Quote, "And the man ABC News now describes as a conservative icon, in 1993 sang Dixie in an elevator to Carol Moseley Braun, the first African-American woman elected to the Senate, bragging, 'I'm going to make her cry. I'm going to sing Dixie until she cries,' unquote." Now, remember where you are in the calendar. The year that Jesse Helms bragged he was going to make Carol Moseley Braun cry was Rush Limbaugh's 5th year in national syndication. Just a year before Jesse Helms bragged he was going to make Carol Moseley Braun cry, George H.W. Bush had invited Rush Limbaugh for an overnighter in the Lincoln bedroom, and he carried his luggage for him. Just a year after Jesse Helms bragged he was going to make Carol Moseley Braun cry, Republicans took control of the House of Representatives for the first time in 40 years based on the slash and burn scorched earth politics of Newt Gingrich and the rabid loyalty of Limbaugh's army of ditto-head listeners. This is the point. This right here is the Republican Party we all knew, we all grew up with, we could see with our own two goddamn eyes, long before blogging existed. We could all see this threat coming straight at us, and we've spent decades warning about it. This is also the Republican Party the legacy media has erased from history, and that all of your favorite Never Trump allies, except maybe one, desperately try to pretend never existed.
That's why history started in 2015.
2016.
With the escalator ride.
And we're not going to talk about shit before that. And if you do, we're going to block you and never invite you on our little podcast to talk about what's wrong with Donald Trump.
What's wrong with the Republican Party?
Right.
Period.
It's a mystery.
Yeah. So how did it come to be that as the Republican Party showed clearer and clearer signs of going insane and being utterly racist, the legacy media and elite conservatives just didn't see it? You know, I will never forget David Brooks on the NewsHour saying, I don't know what Rush Limbaugh says. I don't know what that is. I don't know what that's about.
And on the Charlie Rose show, I don't have a machine to see in people's hearts, but there's probably not racism in there. You know?
It was because the obvious trajectory of the actual Republican Party was in conflict with the Republican Party as they wished it to be. And the reason we know this is because they fucking told us so.
Yes, they did.
This is from the Washington Post, September 18th, 1997. Before we get there, the only thing you need to know about the Weld fight the article refers to is that it was when Bill Clinton nominated Harvard-educated Boston blue blood Republican Governor Bill Weld as ambassador to Mexico. And that was kind of the bipartisan thing, right?
Sure.
We're going to put a Republican in. Okay, we're going to make him ambassador to Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
And Bill Weld, you might remember also, was the Libertarians Party vice presidential candidate in 2016.
Yeah.
I have that stuck in my head.
Yeah.
The reason I have it stuck in my head is he was governor of Massachusetts when I lived there. Jesse Helms blocked Bill Weld's nomination as ambassador to Mexico by refusing to even schedule a hearing. And does that sound familiar?
Does that sound familiar?
Because Helms couldn't stand Bill Weld's Massachusetts social liberalism. This was the bipartisan Clinton administration, reaching out across the aisle to Republicans.
The good old days, Bluegal, those good old days.
When you work together.
Together.
But this long-forgotten fight also opens up a window onto what was going on in elite conservatism as the politics and rhetoric of Helms and Gingrich and Limbaugh and all their imitators were ascendant in the Republican Party and among the Republican Party base. This is from The End of an Era of Bashing Government, September 18th, 1997, by E.J. Dionne. And listen for some familiar names.
Yeah.
Because apparently no one ever retires in this universe.
They just get promoted.
Oh, God. Quote, "For the sake of the Republican Party, the recent fight between Senator Jesse Helms and former Massachusetts Governor Bill Weld ought to be the last gasp of an old argument. If Republicans are serious about running the national government, they need to believe in governing. Sweet summer child."
I know.
They haven't proved that yet. Don't believe me on this. Listen to two Republicans. And here they are, William Kristol and David Brooks, who offered a manifesto to their party this week in the Wall Street Journal, 1997. It had nothing to do with the Helms-Weld fight, but much bearing on it. Quote, "The era of big government may be over, but a new era of conservative governance hasn't yet begun," they declared. Why? Unpleasant though it is to admit, a barrier to the success of today's conservatism is today's conservatism. Those three dots in between today's conservatism are theirs, presumably to emphasize their heresy. Wishing to be left alone isn't a governing doctrine, they write, contradicting the governing doctrine of many in their party. Indeed, in recent years, some conservatives' sensible contempt for the nanny state has at times spilled over into a foolish and politically suicidal contempt for the American state, a conservatism that organizes citizens' resentments rather than informing their hopes will always fall short of fundamental victory.
I couldn't read this without laughing and cringing.
I just think of, Steve Bannon.
Yeah. That's all he does. That's all he does.
That's all he does all day.
And they won.
And they ask a question, they, meaning David Brooks and William Kristol, ask a question remarkable only in light of current, meaning 1997, Republican rhetorical habits. How can Americans love their nation if they hate its government? Unquote. The answer to that is easy.
Yeah, the answer to that is Donald Trump.
Donald Trump.
And the Tea Party movement.
Yeah.
And Rush Limbaugh. Yeah. And Newt Gingrich. And the entire...
And none of it matters.
None of it matters.
You're asking for logic.
Yeah. Well, and this is going on with the article because it's, like Beetlejuice.
It's rich.
Like Beetlejuice watching The Exorcist. It just keeps getting funnier every time I read it. And we're not laughing at our situation. We're laughing at the absolute. But the plan was hatched here. You can watch it being hatched. Yeah. This is, again, back to the article. Kristol and Brooks, both editors of the Conservative Weekly Standard, keep that in mind, were not just mouthing off. They have been working for the last year on a new approach for Republicans grandly called national greatness conservatism. Yeah. The idea is that government should be used at home and abroad to pursue large goals.
Invading Iraq?
Like invading Iraq. Theirs is the conservative tradition currently unfashionable of Alexander Hamilton, Henry Clay, and Teddy Roosevelt. All believed in strong government. Bill Kristol is not shy about criticizing Republican politicians for factionalism and intellectual paralysis. Quote, they are captives to these conservative sects instead of thinking in a fresh way about the American tradition, he said in an interview. Kristol and Brooks are suggesting that Republicans give up the pretense that they are consistently anti-government. Instead, the party should ask what limited but energetic government would do.
Invade Iraq.
Invade Iraq. And in the very next sentence, for them, this includes an interventionist foreign policy. Like invading. Well, Kristol had much bigger plans. He wanted to decapitate every region, every regime
in the Middle East. Absolutely.
And basically turn it over to Halliburton.
And loot it. Yes. Yes.
That was his big plan. And I remember I could never find the clip, but as the Iraq War was just falling apart, and as he was being more and more closely questioned about, what the fuck were you thinking? Yeah. He said something that was like right out of Dr. Strangelove. He said, we could do all this if we had the will to do it.
If we had the will to do it. Yes.
And like, Jesus Christ.
I remember that. Yeah.
And and everybody looked at him like, oh, I see who you're channeling.
You're a psycho.
You're a psycho. You're a fascist. You're a fucking fascist. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Anyway, back to the article. They don't mind that this makes them sound like Cold War Democrats in the tradition of the late Senator Henry M. Jackson. Kristol acknowledges that there is absolutely no mass base for his brand of conservatism. A minor problem, he said with a chuckle.
Yeah, it's like 1 million dead American soldiers that his plan would take, at least.
Again, back to Dr. Strangelove. I'm not saying we'll get our hair mussed, but it's worth it.
Yeah.
Back to the article. God. But New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani fits this mold. And mold is not spelled with a U either. Yeah. Such Republicans as Lamar Alexander, Bill Bennett, Steve Forbes, and Senator John Kyle of Arizona have expressed interest in aspects of the greatness doctrine.
Yeah, aspects of the greatness doctrine, like how it'll help my war stocks.
Yeah. Now back to the article. What's missing are specifics. A problem, since Kristol and Brooks had to explain where they differ from Democrats, who also favor limited but energetic government. Using government on behalf of national greatness could get you right back to the New Deal.
Oh, no.
Yes. And finally, there's a message here. The era of bashing government is ending.
Oh,
unquote. God. Famous last words to be carved on the tombstone of the Washington Post, where this was published in 1997.
In this September 1997 article, of all the people in America you could interview, the Post sought out Bill Kristol and David Brooks, who are being cited here as editors of the Conservative Weekly Standard. And this was very common. Quotes from them were regularly appearing in prestige publications like the Post, the Wall Street Journal, and the New York Times. Mm-hmm. And why? Why was this?
Why?
The Weekly Standard had only come into existence barely 2 years earlier. So why are these two goofs suddenly the voice of elite conservatism? Because money.
I know.
Because money.
Because money.
Because billionaire Australian fascist Rupert Murdoch was on a buying spree. Among his many, many purchases were the Chicago Sun-Times, which he bought in 1983, which, by the way, prompted Mike Royko to quit, cross the street, and go to work at the Tribune, which no one thought he would ever do.
No. The Republican Tribune, I'd rather wipe my ass with porcupine than ever.
Yeah.
But you know what? They were better than fucking Murdoch.
Rupert Murdoch. That's the thing. Yeah. In 1993, Murdoch bought the New York Post for the second time. In 1996, he and Roger Ailes cooked up Fox News. And in 1995, he handed Bill Kristol a big bag of cash and told him to set up a prestige, boutique, conservative magazine that would cater to the carriage trade, right? Mm-hmm. That would be the highfalutin, big, long words. Mm-hmm. And so they got column inches throughout the media.
Yes. Well, they got television coverage. They got to be on Meet the Press and NPR because they were respectable, right? This is respectable.
Yeah. This is and Rupert Murdoch bought respectability for them.
Yes, he did.
And that is how these two clowns, Bill Kristol and David Brooks, were anointed as the legacy media's go-to oracles on the subject of the future of the Republican Party. And that's when the dream of a conservative aristocracy really came into its own. Who cared what kind of Jim Crow throwback Jesse Helms was, or what a monster Limbaugh was? I don't know what he says. I don't know. Or what a cancer on the party Newt Gingrich was going to be. As long as they kept getting the bigoted, ignorant base fired up, knocking doors, stuffing envelopes, and to the polls, and as long as elite conservatives like Brooks and Crystal were setting the agenda and giving the legacy media sober, presentable, reasonable faces to look at, who cared? And it's that money that shelters David Brooks from ever being criticized on Morning Joe for anything he's written.
Right.
He's
it's money.
Only as old as his last column. This is the golden rule I have.
The iron law. The iron rule
of David Brooks that I came up with, which is it is required. It is forbidden to read what David Brooks wrote 2 weeks ago. It is required to read what he wrote yesterday. And
still the same. 20
you're just
years
not
later.
allowed to remember what he wrote during the Iraq War.
No.
Or
that's
during
verboten.
the Bush tax cuts.
No.
Or
any
all
of
the
them.
times that he was terribly wrong.
And Brooks is a stand-in for the dozens and dozens and dozens of Brookses out there that were funded by wingnut welfare to become the presentable face of a monstrous agenda.
Yeah,
and they did.
And I want
and
everybody out there to stop asking, "Where's our Joe Rogan?" For fuck's sake, we have so much talent on the left.
We do.
We don't have a Rupert Murdoch to come in and buy up media.
That's the problem.
To push a reasonable, progressive, pro-American citizen agenda.
Yep.
To get us healthcare and housing and childcare. That's what we don't have.
Yeah. We've got plenty of talent.
We got
As we
lots
said
of
before,
talent.
we have warehouses full of artillery shells. We have no artillery pieces with which to fire them.
Right.
That's the problem.
The elites would forever be on the command module. You know, David Brooks would be in charge. It's going to be Rubio.
Right. They're up there in the command module.
Yep. And the base would forever just be the rocket fuel that got the elites where they want to go. Right. It's going to be Rubio. It's going to be Rubio. Don't worry about it. Jeb! Exclamation point.
Mm-hmm.
And really, holy shit, despite being wrong about everything all along, and as readers of the Driftglass blog know very, very well.
Yes, indeed.
For 20 years, David Brooks has continued to be the legacy media's go-to oracle on the subject of the future of the Republican Party, continuing to feed the legacy media and credulous public fairy tales about conservative renaissance just around the corner that never comes. And, you know, conservative young people, I talked to 3 of them, and they're just the future of the Republican Party.
And that has now shrunk down to them saying to each other, have you read Yuval Levin today? Have you read Louisville? Have you read Yuval Levin? Yuval Levin's got a lot to say. They have nobody left in the larder, so they're hanging everything on like one guy to be the future of the conservative renaissance that will never come.
Yep.
And of course,
and
Republicans
and expecting Republicans to come to their senses any day now, and the fever will break, and it just won't.
It just won't. It can't, because that's the machine they built. This is not a fluke.
This is Rupert Murdoch's dream.
Right.
That he paid for.
It just outgrew him and overtook him. He thought he'd be piloting this ship. Wouldn't be in the passenger section with a lunatic up front. But the rocket ship, this is what they built. And they've been building it since the 90s. I mean, since the 50s, really. But you can trace the trajectory of the modern Republican Party. Anybody can see it if they want to. Mm-hmm. Back to the days of Jesse Helms and Rupert Murdoch and Rush Limbaugh. Now, as promised, I'm going to do another Thursday with Royko. And this is going to feature the selected writings of Chicago journalism legend Mike Royko. So instead of the 90s, we're going all the way back to 1969. The summer of 1969. This is Mike Royko's column from June 16th, 1969. The title is Change Bugs an Old Square. I walked past Bughouse Square the other night, and there wasn't a soapbox orator in sight. The little park at Clark and Walton was almost deserted. Only a wino asleep in the grass and a pair of slim young men rolling eyes at each other. It's the kind of change that takes place in a city without anyone really noticing. Just a few years ago, original thinkers and plain loonies still went there to mount vegetable crates and loudly explain how they would reshape the world. Since the turn of the century, It had been Chicago's unofficial open-air forum for radical speakers. If your wife wouldn't listen, or if the bartender threw you out, or if you were mad at the world, you just got up on a box in Bughouse Square and yelled about it. Somebody would pay attention. Maybe they'd laugh, but they'd be there. No subject was too touchy. On a good summer night, you'd have a choice of hearing about the comforts of socialism, the evils of communism, the cruelty of capitalism, the logic of atheism, the glory of God, the hell of war, the elusiveness of peace, the cruelty of bosses, the agony of marriage, and the certainty of the end of the world in 14 days or less. Regardless of what a speaker said, nobody lobbed tear gas, and the FBI didn't take pictures for the files. The only punishment in Bughouse Square was being ignored. It had all kinds of speakers over the years. Some sounded like they had just staggered over from a nearby tavern. Others were as confused and vague as an alderman. But there were real pros, often self-educated working men who lived alone and liked to research an offbeat subject at the library and talk about it in the park and pass the hat for the price of a meal or a binge. In a way, they were the professional ancestors of today's TV commentators. Serious radicals from across the country made Bughouse Square a regular stop. Before both world wars, the park echoed with anti-war sentiments. Advocates for the labor movement were safe from billy clubs in the square. Long before today's generation was born, soapboxers talked about hunger, slums, inequality, the draft, and giving poor people a voice in governing themselves. Audiences heckled and laughed when they listened to pipe dreams about the 30-hour work week, Social Security, and free medical care for the aged. I remind you, this is from 1969. The audiences were seldom as intense as the speakers. Most people drifted over because it was a good place to get an evening of free entertainment. Tourists liked it. They could go home and say they heard a dirty man talk about free love right there in a public place. Ooh. If the speakers were dull, which was unusual, somebody might be playing a washboard, and prize fights were held on the grass a few times. Local bohemians and intellectuals hung around the park, and they were fun to gawk at. It was something like an early day Old Town, but without the gloom of today's youth. By losing its voice, Bughouse Square has completed a cycle. Originally a cow path, it was given to the city by its original owner in 1842 to be used as a park. And for many years, it was just that, a quiet little city park, formerly known as Washington Square. When it became an orator's haven, it was dubbed Bughouse Square. Now it's just a little quiet city park once again. There's no mystery as to why it has stopped being Bughouse Square. Who needs it today? The whole country has become Bughouse Square.
Wow.
Thank you for your attention. Mike Royko predicting Twitter in 1969.
Well, and, the protest marchers of 1969 being
Hell yeah.
This is something that Joe Biden continually brings up.
Yeah.
Which is,
this is his generation.
Dudes, I survived 1968.
Yeah. Yep.
And if you survived 1968 as an adult, and you and I were kids, you realize just how bad things can get. I mean,
yeah.
I have talked to people who worked in Bobby Kennedy Sr.'s campaign. And when he was killed, now that was after Martin Luther King had been killed. It was after JFK had been killed. The people working on that campaign thought the world had come to an absolute end.
It's the end of the world. It's the end
of the world. You think we cried on Election Day this month? We felt no pain compared to what people felt in 1968 when Bobby Kennedy was shot.
All of their leaders, all of them being
all
cut
of them gone.
down. And who stepped into the void? The worst
Richard
people
Nixon.
they knew. The worst people they knew. Yep. Now, I'm not saying today's tears aren't real.
No, but perspective.
Right. And this column was written, 8 months after the 1968 Democratic National Convention.
Yeah.
This is clearly a reaction to that. A lot of Royko's stuff was a reaction to that.
Right.
But it was clear that, look, there used to be a place where you could get together and say crazy shit. And people talked about living wages and a 30-hour work week. And nobody beat the shit out of them because it was cool. Everybody went there, even if it was just for entertainment value.
To watch a crazy person give a speech.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been listening to a lot of music lately to kind of keep my mind busy. And
Yep.
one of the things I've been doing is listening to the Beatles. And Revolution was written. John Lennon was in Europe, and there were tanks going into Paris.
Right. Yeah.
You know, and the president of France had to leave Paris because de Gaulle had to leave Paris because it was too dangerous for him to be in the capital of France. And and this was John Lennon. If you're talking about destruction, don't you know that you can count me out? Because the violence that was going on throughout the Western world.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So yeah, and the other thing I've been listening to is Nowhere Man.
Yeah.
Sitting in his nowhere land, making all his nowhere plans for nobody.
Wait a minute. Have you been peeking at Mike's blog roundup for tomorrow?
Oh no.
Okay.
Really?
Well, as of tomorrow, the White Album dropped. On tomorrow.
Wow.
So tomorrow you'll be hearing While My Guitar Gently Weeps.
Oh, wow.
Which I think is just a
Tomorrow
beautiful
is
song.
the anniversary of the White Album dropping.
Yep.
Holy crap.
I know.
Well, and then the other one is just about the Republican Party. It's a dead man's party. Who could ask for more? Leave your body and soul at the door.
At the door. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, on that cheery note.
Yeah. No, but really. I mean, there's all kinds of music that will jump out at you if you give it a chance.
The thing
all
that
right,
gives
let's do a news roundup from the Cornfield Resistance Persists file.
Yes, indeed.
This is from our president, Joe Biden. Quote, "Today, I had the honor of awarding Cecile Richards the Presidential Medal of Freedom." Yeah. With absolute courage, she fearlessly leads us forward to be the America we say we are, a nation of freedom. Through her work to lift up the dignity of workers, defend and advance women's reproductive rights and equality, and mobilize Americans to exercise their power to vote, she has carved an inspiring legacy.
Yeah.
Unquote.
Her mother would be proud.
Yep. I get to read this next one too, don't I?
I think the next one just has your name written all over it.
I think I get to read this one.
Yeah.
From the Daily Beast, Holy Callista Gingrich, Batman. The headline, Pete Hegseth brings mistress turned wife to GOP prayer call in bid to save flailing nomination. And as I said on Blue Sky, if Pete Hegseth's nomination doesn't go through, maybe the mistress turned wife can be ambassador to the Vatican.
Yeah. It's like
not, Newt Gingrich's 6-year mistress turned wife, Callista.
It's not perversion, Bluegal. It's tradition. All right.
You're a bunch of awful people. Anyway.
Just a few more. Everyone knows what's going on. Crazy people are being appointed and shot down in the cabinet, and more crazies are. It's a Pez dispenser of lunacy, and you can follow it in detail if you'd like. We'll touch on that, of course, but we're going to round it up with just a few smaller items, like Cenk Uygur has followed Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski down to Mar-a-Lago to kiss some saggy orange ass. This is him speaking on social media. Quote, "When I became a Democrat, it was the more tolerant party. Republicans are run by..." Yeah,
I'm sorry.
I know. Just like, Jesus Christ, man. Just no shame. I need the money. I need the fucking money.
Right.
And I need to be near people who can do things for me.
Mm-hmm.
So this is what I'm going to do now. And if you burn your followers, who the fuck cares?
Yeah. No.
Republicans are run by religious nut jobs, as opposed to now, and corporate robots. Now the Democrats are, in a lot of ways, the less tolerant party. The least tolerant part is actually the establishment wing of the party, unquote.
What the fuck is he talking about?
He's talking
saying
about
mean things about Democrats.
Right.
So that credulous Republicans say, Cenk Uygur switched.
Well, and Post Left Watch notes what's really going on here. Quote, "Cenk is taking the Greenwald path, where he wants you to believe that the right is more open to ideas and is nicer to dissenting opinions than the left is. This is just 2019 Greenwald," unquote. And believe me,
maybe Cenk needs to meet up with that guy we talked about on Twitter who was blaming Alex Castellanos for siding with the anti-Trump Fox News.
The anti-Trump Fox News. The truth can only be found on Rumble, Bluegal. On Rumble. And believe me, if you want to know more about 2019 Glenn Greenwald, just put a nickel in the Odeon and I'll play you an hour's worth of what happened to Glenn Greenwald, which I documented in real time and which a substantial percentage of my allies on the left hated me for and abandoned me for. And on that topic, we've been invited on the Bob Cesca show early in December.
I don't know if it's going to turn into a Glenn Greenwald sausage fest with you two guys, but you two, you and Bob Cesca were the ones who saw through Glenn Greenwald.
Yep, early and often.
Very early on.
And paid the price for it. And paid
yes, you did.
Pretty big
Both
price
of you
for it.
did. Both of you did, yeah.
After you, Bluegal.
From the BBC, quote, U.S. media giant Comcast is set to spin off its NBC Universal cable television arm as the industry continues to struggle with the emergence of streaming giants like Netflix and Amazon Prime. The plan formally announced on Wednesday is to create a new company that will include channels such as MSNBC, CNBC, USAE, Sci-Fi, and Driftglass. The Golf Channel.
I've heard that they have the working title of this new organization is going to be called the Not Joe Scarborough Channel. So
yeah, well, you told me during our rehearsal that you thought maybe Joe Scarborough could get 4 hours on the Golf Channel.
On the Golf Channel, where he could just talk endlessly about, I don't know, baseball and being a Republican and whatever he wants to talk about.
Anyway, these networks are still profitable and generated a combined one-year revenue of $7 billion. That's before Joe Scarborough decided to go to Mar-a-Lago and protect himself from prosecution, I guess. Comcast will keep the NBC broadcast television network, its film and television studios, and its theme parks, as well as its Peacock streaming service. This does seem like just stupidity wrapped in a corporate boardroom.
Oh, yeah. No, this is a bunch of people that have no idea. I've never been to meetings this high up in an executive organization.
C-suite, yeah.
But I've been close to people making these sorts of decisions, and I've always been impressed about how often they're completely fucking clueless about what their organization does, what their line staff does, where the strengths and weaknesses of the organization are, why all the people around them are saying, yep, you're right, boss. That's really smart, boss.
Well, and Keith Olbermann talking about the MSNBC executive who didn't have cable.
Yeah.
At home.
Yeah.
So
you could fool him into thinking that you were following some directive because he never watched the programs anyway.
Yeah.
And finally, in a statement to CNN, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. apologized for his previous comments. Quote, like many Americans, I allowed myself to believe the mainstream media's distorted, dystopian portrait of President Trump. I no longer hold this belief and now regret having made those statements, he said, unquote. And actually,
the statements that Trump is a Nazi. That's what where the statements were. Yeah.
Yeah. And I believe we have some audio of this. Is that right, Bluegal?
Raymond Shaw is the kindest, bravest, warmest, most wonderful human being I've ever known in my life.
Raymond Shaw is the bravest, kindest, warmest, most wonderful human being I've ever known in my life.
I said Raymond Shaw is the kindest, warmest, bravest, most wonderful human being I've ever known in my life.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Hey, each week we post to our Facebook page and website an Internet Kitty sent in by you, the listeners. This week's Internet Kitty is Cocoa Bean Willow Whiskerton. Coco moved to her new house lately because she needed a home with like-minded kitties. Mm-hmm. Yes, you may pet her if she's in the mood. And of course, Cocoa Bean Willow Whiskerton eats freshly poured cat food, our fake sponsor. Whether you serve pet store perfection or dollar store dreck, your cat will sit on the kitchen floor and say, "This is the most delicious cat food I've ever eaten." Mm-hmm. And demand that the food they eat is only freshly poured.
Freshly poured, oh my Lord, it's freshly poured.
And you can visit Cocoa Bean Willow Whiskerton at our Facebook page or website. Such a pretty cat. Our website is proleftpod.com, and you can send your Internet Kitty, dog, or other pet to our email address, proleftpodcast@gmail.com, subject line Internet Kitty.
Right.
Please do that. Thank you.
Very important. Very important.
Yep. Subject line Internet Kitty, where you can also write to both of us. Feel free to write us. We love hearing from you. Be aware that if you write to us at any of our addresses, we reserve the right to read your email or U.S. Postal Service. Go Postal Unions! Let her on the air unless you say otherwise.
And remember, just as a side note, if you are writing to us for reasons other than Internet Kitty, don't put Internet Kitty in the subject line. It's just very confusing.
That doesn't happen.
No, it doesn't really happen. Also,
but people will spell kitty wrong.
They will.
Like they'll spell it Kitteh, which is adorable.
Yeah.
But I search for Internet Kitty to find them.
And I've seen your inbox, and it is impressive.
It's full.
Mine is too. Mine is overstuffed. Before we go, I want to remind you not to forget our gourmet coffee guidelines. Please don't make us do Bombas socks ads to make money for this podcast. If you can afford to buy an espresso-based beverage for yourself, buy one for us. This is not charity. This is our job. If you can spare $5 a month, please spare $5 a month at patreon.com/proleftpod. Also, please, if you can, share our show on social media. I know a lot of you do that, and you tell us about it, and we deeply appreciate it. So if you love this podcast, get someone else to listen. We think we do a pretty good job here, and we hear from you that we help save some sanity out there during the darkest days. So
we hear that a lot.
Thank you for your compliments, your kind words, your support, and thank you for sharing us where you can.
Hey, Driftglass, how are the Internet Kitties doing this week?
Well, the Internet Kitties are reminded this week of the Franciscan blessing, which is kind of serious and kind of important, and I'm just going to read it because it's beautiful. May God bless us with discomfort at easy answers, half-truths, and superficial relationships so that we may live deep within our hearts. May God bless us with anger at injustice, oppression, and the exploitation of people so that we may work for justice, freedom, and peace. May God bless us with tears to shed for those who suffer from pain, injustice, starvation, and war, so that we may reach out our hands to comfort them and turn their pain into joy. And may God bless us with enough foolishness to believe we can make a difference in the world so that we can do what others claim cannot be done.
Let's think about living.
Think about living.
Let's think about loving.
Think about loving.
Let's think about the hooping and the hopping and the popping and the loving, lovey-dovey. Let's forget about the wine and the crying, the shooting and the dying, and the fellow with the switchblade knife. Let's think about living. Let's think about life.
The Professional Left podcast is recorded under a Creative Commons license. Copyright 2024-25, GGBG Productions.